Hey, welcome to the Sequential Artist Workshop Pro Calls. Every week we ask another creator, another graphic novelist to come sit down with us and tell us where they came from, what were the first things they made, what did they make recently, how did they do it, what are they thinking about now, how are they going to move forward, how do they keep going, all those things, career things, art things, feeling things, creative things. Every month it's a new creator, new challenges, new stories. Come check it out. Come sit down with us. You can sit down live for some of these calls by being a member of our groups. You can find us at learn.sawcomics.org. Come check it out. Come be a graphic novelist with us. Come join us on the socials. Sometimes it's Comics Workshop, sometimes it's Saw Comics. Either way, come check us out and welcome. Welcome, Dave. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
I don't know how much what do I want to say? How much introduction we gave to these types of calls and what they are. Believe it or not, I'm going to change my glasses from this pair to this pair. There we go, much better. But in general, we just love to hear professional stories, and we'd love to hear how you started out, whether that was age 3 or age 33 or 53 or whatever, and sort of your journey to now, and even what you're working on now. And we'd love to see process. We'd love to hear about stories, good or bad. We'd love to hear struggles, good, which start off bad, but usually wind up good if we're here to tell them about them. So we'd love to just hear anything you want to offer on that. And what I'll do a lot is I'll be summarizing in the chat, because some people prefer to sort of read, and that's for accessibility as well. But I'll just let you dig in if you don't mind starting and just say, great, okay. Well, welcome everybody, and just real quick intro to what we're doing. This is the one time a month where we gather all of the SAW groups together. So you might see graphic novel people here, as well as year-long people, as well as alumni and some of the other groups. So sometimes these monthly pro calls get a little large, and you may be seeing people you haven't seen before. And I hope you'll get a chance to see some new faces, even meet them in the chat perhaps, and get a chance to drink in this great energy from our pro. So thanks, Dave. Thanks for being here. Tell us about yourself.
Thank you, Tom.
Sure.
Thank you, Saw. And it's really heartening to see like this many cartoonists on a single call, which is it's always really nice to see. A little bit about myself. I'm a cartoonist. I mostly do self-publishing. I mostly self-publish my work, although I did have a graphic novel that came out last year through a small press called Radiator Comics. They're mostly a distributor, but they are I think they put out another graphic novel since. Check out Radiator Comics and their website to find out more about what they do. It's run by Neil Bordeaux, who has long been a fan of my work and has really wanted to do a project with me and publish Días de Consuelo, which I'll talk a little bit about. That was the graphic novel that came out. It's basically a compilation of the 6 issues that I published. It's the story of my grandmother and her immigration from the U.S. From the U.S. to the U.S. from Mexico. She grew up in Mexico during the Mexican Revolution, so it was a lot of sitting down and talking with her, as well as doing some research on what was going on at the time, because it was all a big blank for me. And so it was, what turned into a project to just, gain some knowledge and some family history, kind of snowballed into this larger comics project. I'll definitely talk about that and some projects that I've been working on since. I teach for a living, like most people in comics. I teach comics at Lesley University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I should say, I'm in the Boston area. I'm originally from El Paso, Texas, which I just visited last week for my parents' 50th wedding anniversary. Got in yesterday, and have lived in Boston, in the Boston area for about 20 years. I live in Somerville, Massachusetts, and I teach at Lesley, which is in Cambridge, Lesley University. And we're just gearing up for pre-college in less than a month. So that's really exciting to see how comics and high school kids and comics and young people, because young people get it. They get comics. You don't have to sell them on comics the way that you might have to do with with adults. I don't really want to generalize about any group, but you don't really have to sell comics to young people. They love them. Yeah, so I can start out with some early history here and share do some sharing.
Sure.
Let me share the screen here.
If you can't, let me know. Oh, great.
Perfect. Let's see. Whoops. I always do that. I always hit share on the slideshow instead of just hitting slideshow.
Right.
All right, everybody seeing this full screen?
Yeah.
All right, love it.
Crazy lobster claws on the right there.
Yeah, so some really early history, maybe about 20 years ago when I first moved to Boston. I did have some friends move up from El Paso, Texas, that were here for other reasons. They were going to grad school. And so the lot of us just kind of formed a very loose art collective based around superhero personas. And so we did some art exhibitions that way. We did some events, some crazy events in in a loft space near Chinatown. And we did some publishing of comics and zines. And so this is on the left here. It's a story that I wrote about this group of superheroes. And every one of the 5 members, real life members in the group had a superhero avatar. And so mine was this robot just named O, and then or Ortega, and then Ken is a Boutet lobster claw, guy with a lobster claw, and then La Cobra Verde, Princess Di, D-I-E, and then Sarabot. And so we had a very Boston, I came up with this very Boston story that we needed to catch the last train, and so we're all racing the train. So it was just a 4-pager, and so this is the first 2 pages of that story. And then on the right here is one of our crazy costume parties where we got some musicians to play, and we just had a good old time. So I guess the lesson there is, find a group of like-minded people, form a gang, and make some art together. This is another comic that I did with those characters. This is that La Cobra Verde character again. And so I wrote this story where we're all trying to, we interact with a mysterious character called Nostrils Martinez. And so I got a chance to show off some of Cobra Verde's wrestling skills in this particular one here. And that was a lot of fun. So we did that for a few years. And then I had the opportunity to teach at the museum school, which is an undergrad grad college here in Boston. It's linked somehow to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And so, I finished teaching, and I was a little troubled by the fact that I didn't really have a published comic. I did all these like comics and zines, and so after I taught at the museum school, I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna make this work that I've been thinking about, that I've been talking to my grandmother about, and I made Días de Consuelo, and I published. I can hold it up here. I published in this format. This is issue number 6. This is the last one, and then we're looking at the cover for issue number 1 here. And it was basically a chronology of her life, starting with the courtship of her parents, which happened in the early, I want to say the late 19th century, early 20th century, all the way up to when she was born. And so there was little, as anybody who's had the experience of talking with elders, they kind of, well, with my grandmother anyway, she hopscotched around time. And so a lot of our conversations were trying to just wrangle, like, no, don't jump up 20 years. Don't go when you're already in the US. Let's stay with this for a little bit. But thankfully, like she had just a really, really long memory, and her anecdotes were really great. So my imagination filled in a lot of blanks. as to how things looked. I did a lot of visual research. I looked at photographs. I looked, online. I looked at family photographs as well as photographs that were made available to me, like through books that I'd found. And then I have this giant set of notes in the back of each where, I did take some artistic license simply because there was a gap that needed to be filled. As you might imagine, she lived to be 103, and and as you might imagine, there might be some gaps in the story there. And so what's going on in some of these pages is my illustrations of some of these anecdotes. In this case, her father's parents were robbed, and so that kind of motivated them to leave for the United States a little earlier than they anticipated. So this is already in the middle of the Mexican Revolution. And my grandmother's mother, my great grandmother, can't go because she's too far along in her pregnancy. And this is a clear example of kind of like where I had to make some educated guesses as to like people's motives, because it really is unclear why the family was split up in that way. Families just didn't split up, and so I imagined that, and with the approval of my grandmother, we talked about this stuff. We talked about some of the artistic license that I took. It made sense that she was too far. She might have been too far along in her pregnancy, and that was the reason that she stayed behind. So, and then just further dramatizing, some of the hysteria that some of the family members might be feeling with the family being split up, and some of the drama that you might expect with such an emotional moment. And then further back, this is further back in the graphic novel, where my grandmother is born in a marketplace. And what I really, really love about this particular scene is that you kind of see the various townspeople, especially the women, kind of take over and kick the men out of the marketplace because it's not a place for men. And then they quickly usher off my great grandmother as she's about to go into labor. And then to talk about process for a little bit, I love Moleskine books. I love the gridded ones like this. And so I work in a grid format. It's just really, it simplifies a lot for me. So I either work with a grid of 6 panels or 8 panels to a page. And I kind of think of the grid as like a musical staff, like a blank musical staff, and then like how musicians just need to populate that with their music. That's how I feel. I feel like it allows me to just kind of pace things out how I need to, and knowing that there's always going to be 6 or 8 to a page, then I know that those are like the breaths that I need to take. Those, that, oh, there's a natural pause here at the last panel of this page, so that might be a good place to put a pause in this scene, or to maybe like switch, go from where we've from this long shot into a series of close-ups. So yeah, I like working within a grid. I know a lot of artists do. Who knows, maybe I'll change it up and work on a project where I actually have to think about the size of tweaking the size of the panels a little more. But yeah, this is basically the first draft. So it's a balance of figuring out dialogue and staging. And I really don't work from a script. I find that really difficult. Sometimes I will type out pages of dialogue if I feel like the dialogue is is not quite where I need it to be. But it's basically when I'm planning a scene out, I'll know that, I want X amount of pages for a particular scene. And I know that it needs to, I know that I want certain information to come across. And so it really helps, comics are a visual medium. So it really helps to plan out the scene along with the dialogue for me so that I can begin to see that balance. And then, if I see that it is becoming too wordy, then, I'll try to even out the balance somewhere else. I think there's this trend right now where there's just a lot of wordy wordy comics, and I find that, if I'm in the bookstore and I'm flipping through something and biographical comics, they're really, really tough. And I open any recent biographical comic and I see like so much words, and it's like, yeah, you do have to do that when you're getting across a life, but I think that there's a finer balance to be had, rather than let something be primarily dialogue driven. And it's tough. That's not me being critical. That's just me kind of observing a trend right now. And then here's a comparison side by side, just to show how I work. So this is actually the very first page of Días de Consuelo. And so it's, I had this simple perspective going on. You can see that in the sketchbook page. And then just, the series of closing in on our characters. You see Pedro, which is my great-great-grandfather, asking if he could talk to Evarista, the woman that he's courting, my great-great-grandmother, and my great-great-grandmother here is not having any of it. She's a hardline traditionalist. Like, nope, you're not going to talk to her except in these socially accepted settings. So I actually surprised myself with how close I stick to the original layout, but I find that it works. And then occasionally I broke the grid and did a splash page, especially where I thought it was important to I'm sorry if there's any questions. I'm really not paying attention to the chat here. But
we'll get them at the end. We'll get them at the end, Dave.
Okay, perfect. So this is a page where I thought like a double. Is this called a double splash page?
Double page spread, I think.
Double page spread, where you clearly see like the church is the center of life, and everything coming together, and me just kind of nailing the point home that religion was very, very important to my grandmother and her family, and it remained important all the way to the end of her life. So let's see. Whoops. Oh, there we are. And so part of the balancing act with Días de Consuelo was where do I insert history? Because, it's one thing to do a memoir that's set in a historical time period, but where you can assume that there's a certain amount of general knowledge about that. If there's a memoir about the American Revolution, there's some general knowledge that American audiences would have about that. There's not a whole lot of general knowledge about the Mexican Revolution. So I knew that I was going to have to insert a lot of history here. And so I did that with pages like this. So this is an 8-panel grid. And I was balancing my grandmother's life story with some of the events that led up to the Mexican Revolution at the point where she was born. So it started around 1910. The revolution started around 1910. It ended around 1920. Historians differ as to when it officially ended. Some people say it went on into like 1924 because there was still some violence related to unrest throughout the country. I have some family history here about my great-great-grandmother Isabel, and then I lead that into, I intersperse it with some of the events of the early part of the revolution, assassinations and who the players were, and then I weave it into again some family history. So I thought, I'll have a few pages like this peppered throughout the book, just to provide some context. And so that's how I did that. I knew that I didn't really want it to become a book about the Mexican Revolution. I didn't want to focus too heavily on any of the figures. I'm fascinated by the Mexican Revolution, and I'd love to do a graphic novel about it. But I knew that there had to be a balance here, and the balance need to skew more towards the family stories. But that context was necessary. This is kind of a cute moment in the book, and it's one that was inspired by research, and this one scene in particular with in a movie called Viva Zapata, which is directed by Eli Kazan, and Marlon Brando actually plays Pancho Villa in that movie, or is it Zapata? I don't. He might actually play Zapata, kind of inscrutably.
Right.
And so anyway, I had read about kind of early courtship at this time, and there had to be a chaperone present, and the people courting each other could only speak in dichos or sayings, so they could only say things like "a stitch in time saves nine," and reply with "beauty is in the eye of the beholder." So it was all very chaste, all very controlled, no danger of salacious talk. And so in these series of pages, I wrote a little comic scene where Pedro kind of says the wrong thing and recuperates. So I just thought that was a funny thing to do. And I could have included Mexican dichos here, but I chose to do kind of English equivalents. And again, it's the kind of that balance of how to present these ideas. There's a large kind of note at the beginning that these characters are supposed to be speaking Mexican Spanish, that they're Mexican characters. I do have a large glossary at the end. In my notes, I do provide examples of Mexican dichos. So, I mean, I knew that I was writing for an American audience. So throughout the book, there is this balance again of like how to present this material and how to make it as accessible as possible. It's not, there is Spanish peppered throughout, but it's not in Spanish. And so like there's this interesting tension throughout the book. I could have chose to make a different author would have made a different decision. And this is just the one that I made for this material. And then here's an example of some of the notes at the end. So these are the notes that were for the single issue comics, not for the graphic novel. So at the back of each one. And then, you could even see page 17 here. Lots of liberty taken here. I don't know that the marriage arrangement happened quite in this way. And so just making sure that, especially for my own family history, mainly, that my cousins and my aunts and uncles know where I took some liberty and why I did. And then the graphic novel. So Neil Bordeaux from Radiator Comics had talked to me about making the graphic novel and putting these together. And so somewhere around 2019, 2020, we started to do that. And so here's the way the cover evolved. The final cover is on the left here, and then some early takes on it, just experimenting with different like presentations and color. And it is kind of an ensemble piece, so I thought it was important to bring like this group of four, which is my grandmother at the very front there, her grandmother, and her mother in the middle, and then her little sister in the back. And so I knew that that featuring those four would be really important. It also gave me the opportunity to do some chapter art, so to have some material that wasn't in the series. so each issue, it becomes a chapter, and so I was able to create some chapter art with the different chapters, and I included an introduction as well, just to provide additional context. So I wrote this little 2-page introduction about, I grew up in El Paso, Texas, as a Mexican American, and just kind of the things that I saw all around me throughout my childhood. So like, you had the Three Amigos on TV, and just experiencing that along with some of my grandmother's anecdotes that had very little. I thought of the Three Amigos when I was thinking of these oral histories that my grandmother would occasionally give us. It's not like she sat us down ever and told us these stories. They would come out as we were talking to each other. And so so I have Somerville, Mass. So I have this page here that's El Paso, Texas, sometime in the late 90s, all of us looking around, and the Three Amigos is on TV, and then my grandmother saying that silly movie reminds her of the little town in Mexico where she grows up. And then a few years later, around 2010, is where I start talking to my grandmother and beginning to get all this information from her. So my grandmother also inspired a lot of a lot of other work. This is from a comic. So this was a contribution to an anthology. It was done very quickly, and so the style's a little rougher. But I eventually turned this around and expanded upon it, cleaned it up, as you can see, and turned it into a comic called River, which is no, I'm sorry, this is Días de Consuelo. So actually, the last part of Días de Consuelo, I took this story that I had written for an anthology about my grandmother's train ride north to the US, cleaned up a lot of the art, as you can tell, and this is the last chapter of this is from the last chapter of Días de Consuelo, and then I added color to it, which I thought color always gives a nice touch, although I haven't used it since. So this is from River. So River, a colleague of mine, Zeke Pena, who is an illustrator who lives in the El Paso area, he was putting together a show with the theme of River. And so I proposed, making a comic narrative. I think it originally was just supposed to be 12 pages, but it ended up being more along like 16 or 20, I think. And so pulling, again, anecdotes, and these anecdotes aren't from Días de Consuelo, because the story kind of stops with Días de Consuelo as they cross the border into the US. So this is once they're in the US and they've settled where New Mexico and Texas and Mexico kind of meet in this area called Anapra, which is now called Sunland Park. And so just, visualizing some of those the neighborhood, how the dramatic backdrop of the desert mountains behind them, and then some incidents that occurred there, including her witnessing a man being shot by the Border Patrol, and her memories about that, and how her father was angry at the Border Patrol agents, and she specifically remembers how his boots were tied around his thighs because he didn't want them to get wet as he crossed the river. I'm referring to the man who was shot on their property. And then just wrapping up this particular anecdote with how they all had to go downtown to file a report. That was the only time she ever saw anything like that. And so it's not just a single story in this book, River. So here's an example of, I switched to another story. During Prohibition, she was what's the word? She was a G-man. She worked for the U.S. federal government, kind of keeping tabs on tequila smugglers. So from her front porch, she would write down license plates of cars as they crossed the border. And when she was too busy to do it, her own mother stepped in. So yeah, she was snitching on the tequila smugglers.
And that's your grandmother's?
That's my grandmother. Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing.
And then how she would have loved to continue the work because it was a welcome contribution to the household, but also her father was a very rigid man and an alcoholic, and he did not like any sort of upset to like what he perceived as the natural order of the household, especially his younger daughter, you know, being a breadwinner. So eventually there was an end to that work. And then some additional anecdotes there was this bridge of ropes that she just enjoyed running across as she would catch the bus into El Paso. So she lived, it's an area that eventually became smelter town because of the large smelting plant that this company called Asarco ran for decades. It's where my mom grew up. It's where she had her childhood. It's where my grandma raised most of her kids. It's where my grandfather worked until he was forced into retirement into early retirement because of an injury, a work injury. And so this is before her courtship or any of that. This is still when she's a teenager and she's taking the bus through El Paso. And then I jump ahead to where she does marry my grandfather. So I kind of wanted it to be a little bit like how my grandmother told these stories and how memories kind of swim around, taking the loose theme that I was given with River and just jumping, you know, around to all these different anecdotes that she had given me. And then ending with the marriage of my grandmother and my grandfather, and imagining what that was like. They got married at the church in the hilltop of Smelter Town, and then they all had a lunch and a dinner that went on into the night. One thing that she told me is that she asked her husband if she could spend one last night with her family, and then they would move in together the next morning. And my grandmother has a vivid memory of the wedding party, you know, all being very festive and walking through the night as they went from the party to my grandmother's home on the other side of the river. So yeah. So those are some of the comics projects that I have worked on fairly recently. I'll talk a little bit about Hacienda in a second, but I also had the opportunity to work with the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston at some point. I think this was 2014, and I was asked by them to propose a comics related space in their youth space. I think it's called the Art Lab. And so I proposed doing a comic that people could rearrange the actual panels on the wall and write dialogue with some of the activities that are on in the center there. And so we did that. And so I have the prompts like one day, meanwhile, but then, and then I created these different scenarios with this funny set of characters, and people had the opportunity to create narratives about them. And along with that, you can see in the back, I wrote this story of Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, which was printed into a newsprint comic. Oh, here's another set of three there. That was printed into a tabloid newsprint comic that was made available for free for everybody, which was nice. So this is the black and white in process version, where Don Quixote and Sancho Panza are talking about themselves as comic book characters. And that kind of relates. Oh, here's the finished newsprint comic. It kind of relates nicely. If you've ever read Don Quixote, it's called like the first modern story in some circles, because Don Quixote and Sancho Panza at some point are aware of themselves as characters in a novel. And so I decided to run with that and use it as an opportunity so that they could deconstruct comics. And you know, like why so an example here is "Oh, why did you shudder, senor? That long shot back there, what could it mean? Perhaps it is just to indicate the passage of time. Sancho, we are in a comic strip. The passage of time is all we have. The illusion of time is at the core of our being. Without it, we are mere illustration." And then again, you see the same shot. "There was again, and this place is littered with close-ups. The great Don Quixote does not need close-ups to enhance his speech. Perhaps the long shots are like a pause or a hesitation. What? Don Quixote never hesitates. He only charges forth." And then he ends up on the ground, and there wasn't a proper transition that happened, and so Sancho inserts a transition there. And then I think my favorite one is "Surely the work of an amateur self-publisher of some kind. Help me to take it all down. Scandalous," says Sancho Panza. So yeah, so that was a lot of fun. And then I decided to illustrate the full Don Quixote story on this third page here, where Sancho Panza becomes a little frustrated with Don Quixote's demeanor and decides to lay out his story for himself. So that was a lot of fun. And then the final page, the fourth page on the back, is where this episode in the book where Don Quixote descends into the cave of Montesinos. So I decided to use that as an opportunity so that people could fill in the blanks as to what happened from the beginning to the end. So Don Quixote descends into the cave I have on the second blank panel here, and suddenly just then, meanwhile, and then, you know, just an exercise for people to get from panel 1 to the end there, and then ending with, yeah. Oh yeah, this is the prompt from Sancho. Who are you talking to? And just seeing it close up, I love the little is it a Binde effect? I don't know what that is. The 4-color effect that you see. Like, oh, it makes my heart go pitter patter. And then some process. So I designed these characters. Actually, I had a really, really short timeline. So I worked very differently on this comic than I usually do. I'm just gonna take a sip of water here. And I designed them in Adobe Illustrator. So I'm a graphic designer as well. And so what I did was I created these forms. I created a template for these characters in Illustrator and actually laid everything out in Illustrator. So these props, you can even see the blue line there. It's just these rectangle shapes in Illustrator. And I typed out the fonts and just drew over them. I made a font of my handwriting and I wrote over it. And that just became, I incorporated a lot of how I work now. It helped me to figure out like a balance, a nice workflow. Here is the color layer for the colors that were eventually dropped into it. And stuff like this, I always appreciate seeing, and just trying to come up with a good balance of colors and such. Oh. And I thought it might be a cool idea to have this you saw the result earlier, but this kind of I don't know, it almost looks like paint samples. I really like the gradation there. Yeah, I was really happy with that, with how that turned out. Yeah, so I can talk some more about so let me stop sharing here, about some recent projects.
Sure, yeah. Let's do it.
All right, let's do it.
Okay.
So since Días de Consuelo, I've started a series called Hacienda. Yay. And so what this is, the origins of this is actually a story called Hacienda that I redid entirely. That is the first story in this. So it's a one-person anthology. There's 2 short stories in this one. And I'm happy to say that these were on my doorstep when I got back from a trip, from my trip yesterday. So this is Hacienda 2. So yay. So yeah, this is my one-person anthology. And so the origins of it, in 2012, 2013, Frank Santoro did a contest where it was kind of tightly, it was very rigid. Like it had to be 16 pages. There had to be 8 panels per page. The panels had to be the same size. But it was, other than that, you could do whatever you wanted. And so I had this narrative in my head about a ghost story, kind of an untraditional ghost story that goes back and forth in time without prompting the reader, with no meanwhiles, no suddenly, no but then, which isn't new, but it's something that I thought was really cool. And it made me flesh out this story in a way that I didn't anticipate. So I was always looking for some sort of bridge between like the actual events and the modern day. And so I had found it when I was in a hotel room once and came across like a ghost hunting reality show. And I'm like, that's it. So that became the story. So you have the actual events of what happened 100 years ago at this hacienda in Mexico, and then you have the ghost hunting team on the show called Spirit Search, and that's the name of the story, and how they go through the different rooms and they talk their production talk, and then I also have these characters, these two editors who are kind of commenting on things to each other, but also for the reader. So they're also this additional bridge. And then you see kind of like their editing talk. And then suddenly the story, so you still see the editors there, and then suddenly the story shifts. And you get these two other characters that you hadn't seen. And unbeknownst to the reader, these characters were from 100 years previous. And then so I have this jumping back and forth between, what actually occurred, and then what this kind of fakey production is trying to report, is out there. And so this was a lot of fun to do when I did it about 10 years ago. And then it was also fun to completely redraw it, which I did. Because I wasn't happy with my style back then. And I knew that if I was starting a series, I wanted to make sure that it was a style that I was working in now, and one that I would want to work with for a while. So yeah,
how much did you revise the story?
I didn't revise the story at all. I didn't change any dialogue. I didn't change any of the staging. I just redid the style. I kind of I'm much happier with how I drew it. And so it's short for a comic. So I decided to write a second story called the Campesino Trilogy. And so yeah, this story just kind of a kernel of an idea that ballooned into something else. I had these two characters who are wandering through the desert. They're film enthusiasts, and they're looking for a trove of a buried film archive. It was kind of inspired by those Atari cartridges, the E.T. video game that were buried in New Mexico. And then, as they're talking about this filmmaker who did these surreal arty films, kind of like oh, I'm blanking on his name. Jodorowsky, Alejandro Jodorowsky. He's in the legendary filmmaker that they're talking about. It's fictional, and he's called Sando, but he's an amalgamation of Jodorowsky and some other wacky arty filmmakers. And so yeah, so their journey becomes the journey through this trilogy. And then they end up not finding it, and then yeah, and then at the very end, I included some process about the original story, and then also this large drawing that I did, at some point, where you see the main character, one of the characters, looking through the hacienda. So yeah, I was really happy with how this turned out, and then just keeping up with that series. This is Hacienda 2. And it's one story. It's a 32-pager, and it's called The Getaway. And I really like the idea of media being a bridge between like the past and the present. And so I decided to have another reality show, but this time a reality game show, kind of like The Bachelorette and The Bachelor series. But somebody disappears somebody runs off the set, and so that kind of creates the scandal. And then in the meantime, you see another set of characters from the past, yeah, just trying to bridge the two narratives together. This one proved to be a challenge. Like I did not know what the ending was going to be for the longest time, and then finally came up with something. But yeah, I like I incorporated some surreal imagery of my own, kind of like that filmmaker, like a space shuttle in the middle of the desert,
Nice.
the Taj Mahal. So it was an opportunity to really just kind of have some fun, I think. I never let these things get too serious. I always want there to be like kind of an element of fun. And to talk about process for a little bit, I was actually just working on this. Again, I love moleskin notebooks,
The big
especially
ones.
these large,
Yeah.
the big ones, yes. And I actually work on a series of stuff. I have a small sketchbook that I like just drawing in. You know, if I'm on the subway, I'll just draw people. You know, if I get a flash of an idea, I'll just write it down really quickly. I think I have it right here. So that's this one. This is like the daily sketchbook. It just has,
Nice,
you know, random thoughts and all sorts of tidbits along with people. So that's always in the bag. And then I have this one that I just started using to kind of, I figure with a series, like this is mostly blank, so there's not a whole lot to show you. But I figured starting with issue 3 that I'm about to work on, that just to work on the look a little more, especially with this one. So I am doing something that I don't usually do, and you know, just starting to draw out characters in certain scenarios in this format. But what I really love is these large moleskins that are gridded. And so this has the entire, so this is the story that I was just telling you about. This is Hacienda 2.
Mm-hmm.
Again in the grid format, and the first draft here is very faithful to what ended up. I think I showed you this page with the eye and the figure there. So yeah, so
you're redrawing these completely though. You're not tracing them up or anything in your final paper.
Well, what I do is I scan them. And then I turn them into blue line in Photoshop. And then what I'll do is and I'm rethinking this particular workflow is I'll print them out onto let me just grab this off my wall here. I'll print them out onto Bristol board. And then so I have the blue line, which may not show up, is here. And so this comes directly from my sketches. And then I typeset in that font that I made of my own handwriting, and I get my word balloons all nice in InDesign. And so I'll lay everything out with the blue line art in InDesign. And I stole this workflow from Alison Bechtel because she I forget where I heard her. This was probably about a decade ago. She said she lays everything out in Illustrator, which is way harder to do. And I hope she's graduated to InDesign. That's where you want to do it. And so I lay everything out in Adobe InDesign. As a matter of fact, let me see if I can share.
Oh boy.
Share my InDesign.
So while you're looking for that, I want to ask one question, which is that, so you're printing out the lettering, so the lettering comes out black and the sketches come out blue? Is that what you're doing?
No, I'm printing out everything in blue.
And then you're writing, you trace the lettering. Got it.
And then I trace my lettering.
Yeah, that looks nice that way.
Yeah, I don't know. I could just let the font go through, but I don't know. I'm a sucker for handwritten letters.
The human touch.
Yeah, the human touch. Hopefully I can find this quickly. Let's see. Comics.
This is great. While you look for that, I'll just mention to at least to anybody in our programs who've been through the graphic novel program, and even the new people, we work through sort of 6 steps. And in Dave's talk so far, I've heard all 6 steps. And I'll do a quick recap if we have time, because I've been pretty excited by them. And I'm going to ask Dave about one of them in particular. But Oh, and Heidi's asking a good question, which is, how do you print on that big Bristol? You must have a big printer.
I do have a big printer. So let's see. Short answer, I do.
Yeah.
Let's see. Long answer, I will tell you exactly what kind of printer I have. So let me share.
7710.
Let's see, where is it? InDesign. Okay, so this is my InDesign file for Hacienda chapter 1. And so this is, so I just scanned in my sketchbook pages, turned them into blue line, and I'm working really hard on getting tighter art because this is really loose. And so having loose art is, and this is really loose. Having loose art, I'm learning more and more that is kind of a setback. Like I spend a lot of time trying to flesh out this scene in ink when I just barely have like ovals and rectangles. And so I'm trying to improve getting tighter line art. So if you're the type of artist that has really, really good tight line art, kudos to you. Then I say you have an advantage because it's really, really tough for somebody like me, though I am improving. And also, like, if a character's design, like this character design changed, this guy's character, and so like just making sure that I'm being consistent with character designs, and all that sort of thing. You can see my my font here, and I'll highlight it and open the, let's see, can I just open? Yeah, here it is. Oh, well, I used to have a font called Davo, but I really, really liked this. I named my font Davo. I really liked this one called Back Issues BB. And so yeah, I use this one here. And then what I'll do is, and then yeah, this is the entire run here. And then what I'll do is I'll eventually start replacing these with the final art. And so I'll show you the final InDesign file for chapter 2. And then so this had previously been blue line and typed out. And so I just go through and replace everything with final art as I finish it. And what I really like about InDesign is that you know, if you don't know it, you may it may behoove you if you're going to be working with self-publishing to learn it and to get good at it, because everything is about frames. And so, like, you know, I know that I want to include chapter art here, but you know what I could do is I could just take the art that this panel came from and just drop it in. So if I move it around, you could see that there's actually a page, there's an entire page there, but I just have this particular section be the chapter art there. So, you know, and that just comes from knowing the program and knowing its capabilities and tweaking it. And I've been a graphic designer for 20 years. So it's just like, oh, I know that I can do that, and I don't have to necessarily create some new art. Not that I'm against that, but like it's a time-saving thing. With Hacienda 2, I also heavily used Procreate for cleaning up a lot of my inks. I don't know what it was. I think it might be too humid here in Boston, or not humid enough, but typically I use Crow Quill pen, and I was just not happy with a lot of my Bristol board pages. And also I needed to change some character designs from after I had fully inked them. So I scanned these in as I would needed to anyway to bring them into InDesign, and tweaked them some more with Procreate. And I found a set of brushes that kind of are close to my own kind of inking with a Crow Quill pen. And yeah, it allowed me, it wasn't as time-saving as I thought. In fact, it added time to this project, a lot of time to this project. I originally wanted to published this back in March, and I'm just now getting them from the printer. So it did add that amount of time.
Well, you added a piece of hardware to the system.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, that's a whole that's a whole other ballgame.
That's a whole other thing. But yeah, yeah, this is my InDesign file here. And so it's just a matter of putting things in dropping it in as you complete a stage. And as I'm thinking about this workflow for Hacienda 3, I'm even thinking of taking out the Bristol board stage. So and there's some drawbacks to that, a lot of drawbacks to that, because I love the tactile feel of Bristol, but I feel like I don't know, my experience with this particular story, I don't really want to be doing inking and then just having to go back and tweaking and Procreate the way that I did. Like, cutting out that middle stage might be the more time efficient way to go. I'm still thinking about that. I'm still in a very, very early stage. Yeah, so just to go back to this, like, so I have Hacienda, the Campesino trilogy story here, as well as I just jumped into it and wrote The Getaway, which is Hacienda 2. That's the name of the story in Hacienda 2. And I'm just starting to lay out the story for Hacienda 3. So as well. So it's nice that they're all compact. And a story pitch that I wrote. I love this particular process so much. So there's a pitch that I'm going around to a few people that I wrote. So it's,
wow.
I filled up the 3 of these things, and yeah, here's a little
6 panels a page now.
Yeah, no, this is actually Días de Consuelo.
Oh,
yeah. So I started. I don't know why. I don't know. I don't like to waste sketchbook pages. So this is Días de Consuelo, and so this is my pitch story here. And so I have an entire story laid out over, I think it's 240 pages, and no one to publish it yet. So this may be, if I get no takers on this particular story, this may end up being another self-published work down the line. Yeah, so I have a 240 page book with just sitting in my desk drawer right now.
Oh my God. And you have such a happy attitude about it.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's just it's the process. It's publishing. So like, just to talk about some of the frustrations that you alluded to at the beginning, it's like, self-publishing has its ups and downs. For now, it's working for me. It's this precarious balance of my day job being able to pay for life and to pay for this stuff. Also having a partner helps. So if you're doing this on your own, I just can't imagine somebody doing this on their own. And I don't have an agent, like I mentioned, and I've been looking for one. And agents are really, really looking for stuff for young people right now. Comics for young people, for middle grade, for young readers, for YA. It's white hot, mostly for middle grade, I think. And that's not my audience. I do that particular work that I showed you. That's a middle grade story. So. And if I end up self-publishing it, it'll probably be more of an adult story. We'll see. It's a different world that I wasn't, that I kind of jumped into the deep end when I shifted careers back in 2021. I left my full-time job and started teaching and started to focus on writing that particular pitch. So yeah, and just learning some of the nuances about the large publishers and what it is that they look for. Stuff to me seems a bit formulaic, and so just knowing that, and knowing that you have to work within because they're sales driven. It is books. It is, and everybody's like, Of course, everybody's happy about, you know, books and reading and freedom of expression, but it also is very sales driven. And so like your work needs to fit a certain formula, needs to hit all these right notes. And I have friends who are very successful with it. And you know, I don't begrudge, I fully understand, you know, why it needs to be that way. And you know, maybe with the right project, I'll hit that formula. Comics publishers for the adult audience right now, that's a little tough because, you know, you have your main publishers being like Fantagraphics and Drawn and Quarterly, and they kind of work outside the way that your Chronicle books and your Abrams books and the large publishers do, which they're able to pay. The large publishers are able to pay not royalties, an advance, you know, that offers some economic security. It may not be a large advance, but they're able to pay that, you know, so that you could work on your book. You know, Drawn and Quarterly and Fanta, they don't really operate that way. And I think they prefer to work with artists without agents. So, you know, it's funny having, you know, being a self-publisher, having work that mostly appeals to an adult audience, but also having work that appeals to YA audiences, and having something in my drawer that is appealing to middle grade. You know, having my hand, I wouldn't say that I have my feet in these worlds, because you know, they barely know I exist. But you know, I'm aware of how they work, and so it's just a matter of just making my presence known with the work that I put out, and just trying to every year, you know, I feel like in comics, you know, we all go to conventions. It's just a way to say, it's a way to tell people that you're still around, you're still doing this, and then hopefully the right publisher is like, oh yeah, you're still around. Hey, we should work together. So yeah, holding out for that.
Well, I've got some questions, and I know some other people have some questions, definitely about Días de Consuelo, but about anything else too. And I know actually we can really quickly, two people were asking about what printer you use. So you might, maybe take a moment and tell them what Epson or whatever, and
yeah,
and I'll gather my questions.
Epson, let me see if it's just on my desktop here. You know what, if I hit print, it'll tell me. It's an Epson Artisan, but what series, Dave? Let me look at the printer itself. Whoops. $1430. It's an Epson Artisan 1430. And I can put that in the chat.
Yeah, please do. Epson, I didn't forgot what you said already. I have an Epson 7710. Also, I had a 7720, but they were both good for that same thing. I bought them mostly because they scanned large as well. Thank you.
Oh yeah, this doesn't, my scanner crapped the bed. And so what I actually what I do now is, instead of scanning, I take pictures with my iPad because I love the quality. And I don't, well, I scan my sketchbook pages.
Yeah.
Those are pictures from my iPad. And yes, I do have access to a large format scanner at school. So yeah, that's what I do.
I wanted to, again, for my students, I wanted to give, or our students, I wanted to give a quick breakdown of what I heard, and I'll be real quick, and then we take some questions. John's got one, but I know we had one or two others from earlier in the chat. And that's that we go through this process when we're working on graphic novels. At least here, we talk about coming up with the ideas and nurturing that idea, and then deciding on a format, and then sort of thinking about the structure, and then just barreling through and figuring out the workflow, which is exactly the word you used. And then like sort of like working from the workflow to like planning out that finish, like how do we get it all the way to the printed stage? And then finally, who do we work with to get it printed? How do we get it distributed? Things like that. And so all of you hit on all those points pretty clearly. And I wanted to mention too, when we're talking about the ideas section here at SAW, or at least in the big graphic novels, we encourage people to make a small piece before the big piece and just start with something. And what happens is a lot of people do it and they don't even realize it doesn't. And it sounds like you did it with that train story, right? So that train story was just a story that you wanted to tell from your grandmother's history, right? And then as you were beginning to this larger idea of your grandmother's history, you realized that was part of the larger story, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was the train story that ended up in that anthology. That was the first time that I ever wrote a comic about, or the first time I put into comic form this story of my grandmother. And so, I think I can credit that particular work with, being the springboard for this larger project where I went over 6 issues, and then eventually they were collected and put into a graphic novel.
Yeah, and you redrew it, right?
What's that?
You redrew it.
Yeah, I redrew, I think, a good chunk of that story that ended up being the final moments in Días de Consuelo.
Yeah, cool. And that happens so much. And it's one thing that we try to encourage is like, just start off with a piece, draw it and plan on redrawing it someday, because it happens time and time again. I've seen it so many times. Even Art Spiegelman's Mouse started off that way. You have Prisoner of Hell Planet, which was this early piece. It got redrawn. Pretty sure it got redrawn. He also redid Mouse, the first chapter of Mouse once, but I'm pretty sure he redrew Prisoner of Hell Planet, or might have just reprinted it. Anyway, it's something that you don't realize is part of a larger story, but it becomes one once the larger pieces started coming into shape. Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to talk about, it's interesting because 2 different structures came up when you were talking. It sounds like Días de Consuelo is mostly chronological. Is that right? Even though you were putting together a lot of stories which came in a free-flowing kind of way. But however, when you got off of that project and did the project for the River anthology, you let the structure be more fluid. It sounds like. So it sounds like you let the structure be dictated by the story.
Yeah. River is also chronological, but I didn't really. The structure is kind of like Hacienda in that it flows from one story into the other without any sort of like text telling you that this is a different story. One story kind of ends, either at the end of a page or the end of a spread, and then the next one picks up. So like there's a breath there's a pause that's taken just by virtue of the form itself and the end of the page or the end of the spread, and then it goes into another one. I think the events, as I remember that work, I think it's chronological. The story of just kind of laying out where they were in one story and leading that into the anecdote about the dead body, and then some other slice of life stories, and then how she saw the tequila smugglers, and then some of the other work that she did in some pages that I didn't show you, and then ending with the marriage and the dramatic scene of the nighttime procession from one part of the river to the other.
Yeah, it sounds like a really nice structure. That led me to the question I forgot to write down, which is, will you tell us how to get Hacienda, how to order those? Put that in the chat.
Yeah.
Okay, because I definitely want that in. And also the River anthology I haven't seen either, so if that's accessible, I'd like to.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of my comics are available through my distributor Radiator Comics, which is radiatorcomics.com.
That's definitely way up high in the chat. Let me go get it. There it is.
And then Hacienda won't be available on Radiator for a little bit, but it is available now on Dave Ortega. So Hacienda 1 is available on Radiator, and everything. Hacienda 2 is right now available through DaveOrtegaDraws.com. DaveOrtegaDraws.com, if you want to go there and see some of my work. If you see the Días de Consuelo link, it does link to Radiator Comics. So, and then if you click on the individual titles, it'll take you to where you can buy them. From me. So
yeah. Great. Okay, let's take some questions. We've got 3 hands up, so we'll go to John and then Tara and then Lee. John, go ahead.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dave. That was a lot of fun, very informative. Loved your drawings. So I had 2 quick questions. One is, well, maybe these aren't quick, I don't know, but One is, so I'm just starting this graphic novel intensive workshop, and I know that I'm just going to draw everything by hand. I'm not much of a computer guy. I know a tiny bit about InDesign. So, but I'm just wondering, like, if someone really doesn't have much knowledge on the computer side or graphic design side of things, how would you print out? I mean, I just draw my stuff, make it as clean looking as I can, and then just print it on, or how do you do that?
Yeah, no, I would say just make sure that you you know what the final product is going to look like. Because I know that a lot of times, especially when I started off with comics, I would just start drawing on a Bristol board without measuring out too much stuff. And then by the time I shrunk it down, and on my folded 8.5 by 11 page, I could see that the text was too small. I could see that some stuff didn't reduce as well as I wanted. So there was a lot more trial and error. So if you aren't working with digital processes where you could just type in, page sizes, and then everything, you have a good sense of it just by virtue of the software itself and the way that the software works, and what the page layout that it's supposed to be doing is doing for you, then make sure that you have all your measurements down. There's a reason that we cartoonists work on these large Bristol board pages to be able to get a fair amount of detail, because if we were actually drawing, at the page size, we would get less detail.
Yeah,
So
that makes sense.
So just make sure, and it may involve doing some tests, doing like a test page. Just make sure that you have your process down, and that you start off knowing what your final size is going to be. So this is North American comic book size, which is like 6 and some digits by 10 and some digits. So I know from the onset that this is what the final product is going to be, and that shapes all of my decisions going into making that.
I like that size. It also reminds me of your Moleskine books. Like it's almost like, is it close to the size of one of those big ones, or
of which one now? Sorry,
one of the big Moleskine notebooks.
It's sort of, yeah. So there's a little bit more. The Moleskine's a little wider, but yeah. Okay,
and then second question. So I was just thinking about your niche. Writing like more adult kind of themed stuff, and do you think that's why it's harder to find an agent, because more graphic novels are considered YA and young people?
I know that's why it's harder to find.
That's 100%.
Yeah, agents are not looking for agents are not looking for graphic novels for the adult market. They're just not looking for that, and that's largely in part because of what I talked about earlier, is that the publishers are not in line with the way that the rest of the book industry works. So because of that, agents aren't looking to rep adult.
So like a book like Mouse or Persepolis, those are just like the exceptions to the rule?
Well, those, I mean, I don't really know those stories in detail. I kind of know about the Mouse story, and Tom alluded to it. That was something that Art Spiegelman and Francoise Mouly, had published through Raw initially, and so it had an evolution through their anthology project Raw. And then it got published, I think, by Pantheon as a graphic novel. So there was this trajectory that Mouse went on. I'm not sure how Persepolis evolved, but it's a lot of publishing is right place, right time. If you have I don't know actually if Persepolis was serialized before it was a graphic novel. I don't know.
It was published in France as 2 volumes.
Oh, okay. All right.
And Heidi is pointing out in the chat that she's taught it as a YA novel, even though it wasn't exactly presented that way. But it does a sort of
the first book, not the second.
Well, as a quick digression, I'll make this as fast as I can. I once taught Persepolis to some middle graders, I think 8th grade, maybe 9th. And they were supposed to have read it before the artist, would float in and talk about the artwork. And I asked them, so you read about you read Persepolis over the past week, right? And they're like stone faced. They had no idea what I was talking about. It was like the Iranian Revolution and people in the hijabs and things like that. And they're like stone faced. And then I was like, do you remember? And then she went to Austria and they're like, oh yeah, her boyfriend cheated on her. And I was like, is that the part of the story you remember? I forgot all about that, but they were all about the boyfriend cheating on her. Anyway.
Sounds like my students.
Great. Okay. Well, and also really quick, I don't want to make too long digressions, but I do think the one difference in the adult market is sometimes memoir. And so sometimes memoir sneaks in and there's a market budding for that, but adult fiction, adult other things, much harder for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, and even thinking about like a second life for Días de Consuelo, I think there's a potential second life after we're done with the Radiator run. I need to have a conversation with Neil about, if he wants to do another run on it. But I think there is the potential, just because of the material and the audience, for it to be taken up by a larger publisher.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, John, and thanks, Dave. Okay, so we'll do Tara and then Lee, and then probably call it. Hey, Tara, go ahead, and I'll remove the spotlight. There we go. Oh, are you muted?
Well, can you hear me?
Yep, now we can.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much, Dave, for chatting with us. This is really helpful. I love seeing like the moleskin too. Like it's cool seeing your process. Thanks for sharing. I wanted to ask, so if you're self-publishing, because I don't really know anything about self-publishing graphic novels. Like I know novelists, that's a space I'm more familiar with. They like use like Ingram Spark or Kindle direct publishing. So like I'm curious, like do you use like third-party platforms, or are you just printing a quantity from your local printer, or like selling it directly on your website? Like I just don't really know how that works with graphic novels or what the options are.
Yeah. So with the self-publishing stuff that I'm doing myself, with these that I print out and my zines, those are largely distributed by me at various comic fairs and through my website. Since I think I have a almost 10-year relationship working with Neil at Radiator, and he's distributed my comics as well. There's other comics distributors out there like Spit and a Half, and there's other like small press publishers beside that work on a smaller scale, like Silver Sprocket. So there's all these different small presses that do distribution, just distributors. So, I've been lucky to kind of have a distributor as a champion in my work for as long as I've had. And, just your presence at conventions, I think, really does kind of mean something, especially local conventions. I don't know, I can't speak too much about other cities, but in Boston, there's just a really, really thriving comics scene here. We have the Massachusetts Independent Comics Expo, or MICE, that happens it usually happens around October. It's happening in September this year. But I was a special local guest last year. And, that's in part because of the graphic novel, but also, like just knowing your scene, knowing the people in your scene, and knowing them as colleagues, talking to them about comics, seeing them around. I've gotten teaching gigs this way. In fact, the Leslie gig that I got, it came directly from, knowing the people and being friends with people in the comic scene. So that's a really important component, because it is lonely work. It is lonely work. You're sitting at a desk, you're drawing, you're in your head, you're listening to podcasts or whatever, and it is solitary work. So the social component of it is really important and necessary, and also exciting. It's a big component of making comics. And so just figuring out who the people, even the people that own the local comic shops, getting to know them on a first name basis, getting them to know you as creators, and then doing meetups, seeing what organizations might exist, and maybe they work for you and maybe they don't, but you gotta try all that out. And then going to conventions, maybe start with smaller ones, like maybe you're fortunate to have like a local zine fest that pops up, maybe one or two of those in your area. So you can start small, test out the waters, see what works for you, what you can improve on. And then if you have a larger convention, a larger local convention, then apply for a table there. Yeah.
That was helpful. Thank you. Can I ask a second question? Is
Sure,
that okay?
Tara.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is different than like business side, but so like you mentioned like a lot of different details you include in your comics. So I'm curious, like, how do you know like which details are important for your story, I guess, because there's so many. I'm sure you did a lot chatting with your grandmother and like did a lot of research. Like, how do you know what's important to include and what's not important to include?
Yeah, I think there was hardly anything that I left out. I think mostly was just making sure that I focused on the timeline that the set, like the parameters, like starting with the courtship of her parent and ending with her immigration to the US, because she gave me a lot of really good anecdotes, from things outside of that timeline, and that's potential for a future work. But just so setting that limitation for myself, especially when you're working with biography and memoir, I think that's important to just kind of know the scope of the story, and that sets an important limitation to just kind of stay within that framework. And then as for what to leave out, as for the content itself, I'd say I wasn't too I didn't leave out. I'm trying to think of something that I might have left out, but I didn't fixate too much on minutia, like just like the I don't know, some detail that might be fun, but in the span of the story might seem irrelevant. So I made a point of just trying to make sure that each scene was working in the context of the larger work. And minutia may be the wrong word there, because I'm actually a sucker for like tiny details and really sweet anecdotes. But just anything that I felt would bog down the story, I just, or slow it down a little too much. I think that's what I edited out.
Well, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Tara. Thanks, Dave. One last question, Lee.
Yeah, thank you. So Tara, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name. Is it Air or R?
R,
Tara. Okay, great. So you asked exactly what I wanted to know. It's just like how does self-publishing work? And how do you let people know that you exist if you self-publish? And I just wanted to add ask one more small question about that, is that when you do have, when you go to publish it, is there like a certain printing company that you really trust that you like? And has like the options for like self-publishing, like sizes and stuff, has that like influenced how you work or how many pages or anything? So I was just wondering about that.
Yeah. A lot of the zines that I make are just me at a copy machine. So those are just folded 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper. And so those are those which I didn't really talk about. So these are printed by a company called RA Comics Direct, which I'll put in the chat here. And they're out of the Midwest. I've always been really happy with their work. They did anything that's in this format, it was printed by them. So all 6 issues of Días de Consuelo and River and Hacienda's 1 and 2. I like this size. So I think they specialize in North American comic book size. But there are some options there. So if this isn't your size, maybe you can see something that's, if you prefer something a little closer to a square shape, maybe they have that option. I don't really know what their options are for size, just because I've stuck so closely to this particular one. And then you can print comics as you need them. So there's a benefit there, especially if space is an issue, as it is for all of us, and you don't want your apartment to become a warehouse for these things, and you just want to print out a couple hundred copies. Those are I got boxes about this big, 2 little boxes, and those are easy to fit in the apartment. So there's an advantage to doing this sort of printing, sort of, it's not exactly printing on demand, but it's Printing on demand is something else entirely, actually. But you can do low quantities right now. It is, I will say, it is more expensive than it was, you know, after than it was before 2020. And you know, but probably by another $150. But you know, it still is relatively cheap. It's a relatively cheap way to do it. I just think, yeah, we're still basking in the era of cheap printing in general, like the entire book industry, everybody from the major publishers to people working at Kinko's trying to you know, make a little zine. We're all benefiting from cheap printing for now, but everybody's always also, everybody in the industry is also waiting for the other shoe to drop on that. And so make your books now.
Yeah.
You know,
Great,
that's
thank you.
Thanks, Lee. Dave, that brings me to the point I wanted to mention, or actually another, sorry, I'm going to also spotlight myself. There we go. Ask about, which is, again, I'm going to mention that we have this graphic novel group and we work through these steps. And one is ideas, which you talked about, and it was getting your grandmother's story. And 2 was format, which you just talked a lot about. It's like, know what the size you're working at, know that final product size and get that down. And 3 is the structure, which we talked a little bit about just a few minutes ago. I'll skip to 5 and 6. 5 is sort of making a plan to finish. That's having a good workflow and sort of starting to plan that end game. 6 is publishing and printing, which you just talked a lot about. 4th question, or the 4th step, is sort of like, how do we keep going when it's just starting to feel like it's a whole hell of a lot of work? And so I want to ask that of you, because you seem to have a lot of energy. You're like, I finished this book, and then I went out to do that book, and then I realized I had more extra pages, so I filled out those pages. And in the meantime, I did a 240-page pitch for something. So I want to know, I want to know how you keep that energy up and what you do when it flags, because it always does. It's got to flag a little, I think, sometimes. So yeah. Tell us about your energy.
Oh, yeah, I get into my head sometime, and I get down, you know, about the process. You know, like I mentioned before, it is solitary work. So like, you know, there are moments where I feel like I'm making these things for myself, but you know, but then I very quickly, you know, pivot from that to just making sure that I'm always working on the next thing. And that's the thing, is like, you know, work kind of creates more work. And so even if you do feel bogged down in a particular process that you're in right now, you know, even just being able to see some sort of end, even if it's not the end of the project, maybe it's just like the end of like a set of pages that you're working on, you know, just having these like mini goals that you could set for yourself. Something I tell my students all the time at every level is that unfinished projects take up brain space. And so, you know, I've never enjoyed unfinished projects. Like I've never been the type of personality to do all this work and then just kind of let nothing happen. So everything always needs to be working towards something. And so, you know, that's kind of my main motivator throughout things, is just, you know, like knowing that I have this series to look forward to, and knowing that I at least want, you know, 5 or 6, though it'd be really great to have 10. But also knowing like I don't really know what's going to be going on in the long run to be able, for me to be able to sustain a series like this that I'm self-publishing. So, you know, I do have things like, I do have Patreon, which I started like a couple of years ago. I'm not great at that because I feel like it's like social media. You have to be regularly just keeping up with your supporters. It does help when you've wrapped up a project that they've been supporting. And so like there's a lot of attention and energy toward that you can direct at them. And then, you know, just social media is just another beast. So like, you know, just you know, at times it could feel like, especially if your friends are all creators, it could feel like we're all just a bunch of narcissists talking about each other, about ourselves on social media. But that's a necessary step, because, you know, it's letting people know what it is that you're doing. It's keeping, it's letting you know what you're doing, you know. So like a very important component of creating something, you know, no matter what your particular medium is knowing how to talk about that and getting better about talking about what it is that you do. So if I'm upbeat at all, it's because I have this kind of this balance that works for me for now. You know, talk to me in 5 years and I'll let you know how it's going. You know, it's a balance of all this different stuff, and that's working for now. So that has to be enough for me right now.
That's awesome. Dave, this has been so great. And I saw so much I'd never seen before. I also, I'm looking through my notes already. I need a copy of that Here Nightly thing. Can I still get copies of that?
Yeah. I don't sell it on my website, but yeah, I'll make sure to get you a copy.
Do the ICA have it still, or what? Because it looks
no, I think the ICA gave me all their copies, so they're, you know, I have some boxes in my apartment.
You do have some? Okay, all right.
I'll get you one.
Well, we're still planning a Boston date, so we'll do that, and
sure.
then I'll be like, show me the box. That comic looks really great, and another thing I saw that I didn't realize is just how meta some of your projects are, and it seems like they're even getting more so, especially with the way you're playing with time, the way stories are about stories. It's pretty interesting, and I'm really intrigued by that.
Yeah,
more about that.
Yeah, it's a fun aspect. I think it's something that comics, you know, lends itself kind of the way that pages and, you know, panels, they're all abstractions for measuring time. So like just being able to tweak with that and mess with that a little bit, and people's expectations, you know, I feel like I'm not doing anything new. I just, and that's not really my goal. It's just to kind of maybe tell a story in an unexpected way that surprises people.
All right, I'm writing a lot of great quotable quotes here that I'll be recapping later. The best one though might be unfinished projects take up brain space.
Oh, they do.
Great way to phrase that. So everybody, let's keep that in mind as we go forward. Okay, thanks, Dave. Thanks so much. I hope
Thank you, Tom.
I go out and have a great day, or go chain yourself to your desk and get some more work done. Whatever floats your boat.
I have a syllabus to write. So.
Okay. All right. And to everybody else at SAW, thank you for coming. Give Dave a round of applause, and we will see you in whatever group you're in or whatever program you're in. We'll see you soon. I really thank you all for being here. Dave, thanks so much. It's so great getting to know you, and I'm so glad we're close. Well, let's go to Boston soon and meet each other.
All right, yeah.
Okay.
Let's make a date. All right, see you, Tom.
Thank you, guys.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us. This has been a production of the Sequential Artists Workshop, or SAW. You can find us on social media at Comics Workshop and online at sawcomics.org. You can hear about our many courses at learn.sawcomics.org. SAW is a nonprofit and supported by people like you. Learn how to make a tax-deductible donation at the donate page of sawcomics.org. You can join our free community of comics explorers at members.sawcomics.org. Thanks so much for being here.